Hey, my name is Julian Carter. I'm 28 years old and I work construction for Hargrove Construction. I live in a small, tired house on the edge of the city, the kind of place where the porch light flickers and the gutters need cleaning every spring. 3 years ago, my wife Diane died in a car accident on a rainy afternoon. I was 25. People told me I was young, that I still had time. They were wrong. When the woman you plan to grow old with disappears in one afternoon, time stops meaning what it used to. That Tuesday, the rain had been falling since 4 in the afternoon. The site let us go early. I came home with mud on my boots, a sore back, and less than $100 in my account. I was planning to heat up leftover soup, finish fixing a wooden chair for Mrs. Alvarez down the street, and go to bed. That was the plan. Until I stepped onto the porch and saw her standing there. She wore a charcoal coat, hair pulled back tight, heels that had no business on my old wooden steps. The rain slid off her shoulders like it didn't dare touch her. I knew who she was the second I saw her face. Everyone in this city knew Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Global, the woman on the cover of every business magazine, the one they called the Ice Queen of the financial district. Cold, brilliant, untouchable. She was standing on my porch. I stopped a few feet away. "Can I help you?" I asked. She looked at me the way she probably looked at board members before tearing them apart. "You're Julian Carter." I didn't like how she said my name, like she already owned the information. "Yeah, and I don't think we know each other." She reached into her leather bag and pulled out a thin manila folder. She held it like evidence. "I know plenty," she said calmly. 28. Worked at Hargrove for 4 years. You do side jobs restoring furniture. Your wife died 3 years ago. You still live here. You have 17 years left on your mortgage. Your truck needs new brakes. The rain felt colder suddenly. "You had me investigated?" "I evaluated you." "Those are the same thing to me." She didn't apologize. She just looked at me like she was waiting for me to catch up to how reasonable she thought this all was. That calm made my skin itch worse than the rain. "What do you want?" I asked. For the first time, something small moved behind her eyes, not weakness, just something human. "I want to come inside," she said. What I need to say shouldn't be said in the rain. Every instinct told me to shut the door. A powerful woman showing up at my house with a file on my life? Nothing good could come from that. But I opened the door anyway. Maybe because my father taught me to listen before judging. Maybe because she stood there alone in the rain, trying so hard to look like she didn't need anyone. Or maybe I was just too tired to argue on the porch. I let her in. My kitchen was small. Old tiles, scratched table, a coffee mug still in the sink. Victoria sat down across from me like she was at a conference table. She didn't look around with disgust, but I saw her eyes catalog everything. The weak yellow light, my work jacket on the chair, the toolbox by the door, the damp cold of a house that hadn't been heated enough. I set a glass of water in front of her. "Talk," I said. She opened the folder. Her voice stayed even, but there was a new tightness in it. "I want a child." I stared at her. "Excuse me?" "I'm 39. My doctor has been very clear about my remaining time. I've researched my options. I've evaluated multiple candidates. And I believe you are the most suitable person to help me." I leaned back in the chair. "Candidate?" She slid the folder toward me. "I'm prepared to pay you a very large sum. All legal terms will be handled by attorneys on both sides. You wouldn't need to be involved in raising the child if you didn't want to. I only need—" I raised my hand. "Stop." She stopped. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman could buy the entire neighborhood if she wanted. Yet here she was, in my kitchen, talking about having a child the same way she probably talked about acquiring a company. "You came to my house?" I said quietly. "You had someone dig through my life. You sat at my table and told me you want to buy a piece of my body, my blood, my future, with a folder?" I didn't use the word buy. I stood up and walked to the door. The rain was still coming down hard. "But that's exactly what you're doing." She looked at the open door, then back at me. "You didn't even ask why it's you." Because the answer wouldn't change anything. I'm not selling myself. I'm not selling my blood. I'm not selling any child that might come from me. I don't know what kind of men you're used to dealing with, Mrs. Sterling, but I'm not a line item in your budget. For the first time, Victoria Sterling was truly silent. Not calculating silence. The kind of silence that happens when someone who always gets what she wants hears a real no. She closed the folder and stood. Her posture was still perfect, but there was a hairline crack in it now. At the threshold, she turned. Most people want to know why they were chosen. I was chosen once, I said, by a woman who's gone now. I know being chosen doesn't mean you get to keep anything. That stopped her for another second. Then she stepped back into the rain. I closed the door. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept seeing her eyes when she asked if I wasn't curious. I didn't feel sorry for her. People like Victoria Sterling don't allow pity. But I recognized something in her face that I'd seen in my own mirror after Diane died. The look of someone who had become so good at being alone that they no longer knew how to ask for help like a normal person. And that scared me more than anything else she had said. 3 days later, I saw her again. I was leaving the site when I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. The window rolled down just enough for me to see her face. Victoria sat inside, not calling out, not stepping out, just watching like she was still deciding whether to stay or drive away. I walked over. You planning on sitting there until someone calls the cops for stalking a construction worker? She looked at me. No folder this time. I wasn't sure you'd talk to me. I'm talking now. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke with more difficulty than before. I owe you an apology. The way I approached you the other night was wrong, cold, insulting. I treated this like a business transaction, and I understand why you were angry. I rested my hand on the open window. I'm not angry because you want a child. I'm angry because you turned an unborn kid into a project. She didn't argue. That surprised me. You're right, she said. Coming from Victoria Sterling, those two words sounded like a stone dropping into water. Clean, heavy, not easy to say. I studied her longer. This woman wasn't used to apologizing. She wasn't used to being on the weaker side of anything. But she came anyway. I didn't know why I said what I said next. Have you eaten tonight? She frowned like the question didn't fit any scenario she'd prepared for. No. I've got soup and toast. No private chef, no expensive wine, no linen napkins. If you want to talk like normal people, come eat. But no file, no contract, no money. She looked at me through the half-open window. Why are you inviting me? I told her the truth. Because last night you looked like someone who'd gone too far from anything that could make her feel warm. And because my wife used to say, when you see someone standing in the rain, at least ask if they want to come inside. Victoria didn't answer right away. Then she said, okay. She showed up at 7 that evening. No driver, no assistant, no flashy coat. Just Victoria in a simple black sweater, hair tied low, holding a bag of expensive coffee I knew I couldn't afford. She set it on the table. I didn't know what to bring. Coffee's better than a file. She looked at me for a second and the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close. Dinner was ordinary. Hot soup, slightly burnt toast, coffee afterward. Victoria sat at my table like someone who didn't know where to put her hands without a laptop or documents or a glass of wine in front of her. She looked at my kitchen longer than she looked at the food. Your house is very quiet, she said. Too quiet some nights. That made her look at me. After we ate, I asked the question she'd wanted me to ask the first night. Why me? She set her coffee down. This time, no folder. She spoke from memory. I had people look for men with clean medical records, stable lives, no criminal history, no addictions, no record of abandoning family. But you didn't come out on top because of the data. You came out on top because your wife died when you were 25. And instead of letting that destroy you, you kept working, kept the house, kept taking care of what was left. I read the letter from the priest at St. Michael's. He said you fixed the church roof for free 2 winters in a row. I looked down at the table. You only see the result. You don't see the nights I sat on the bathroom floor and couldn't stand up. You don't see me working myself to exhaustion because if I came home too early, the house was so quiet, I could hear myself losing her all over again. Victoria stayed silent. I kept going. I'm not some inspirational story about overcoming grief. I'm just a man who didn't know how to die with his wife. So he kept living. She looked at me for a long time. For the first time, she didn't look like a CEO. She looked like someone hearing something so honest, she didn't know where to put it. Then she said, "I understand that logic." I asked, "What happened to you?" She shut down immediately. I saw it clearly. Her shoulders tightened. Her eyes went cold again. "I don't talk about that." I nodded. "All right." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Strange but true. She didn't speak and I didn't push. Two people sitting in a small kitchen, each holding onto a piece of the past they weren't ready to share. Before she left, Victoria brought up her offer again, but this time without the folder, without the commanding tone. "I still want a child, but I understand your answer." My answer is still no. "I know." I thought that would be the end of it. But the next week she came back, not to convince me. She brought 2 cups of coffee and an old book about furniture restoration she said she happened to find. She sat on my porch on a Saturday morning and asked about the chair I was fixing. I explained how to repair the broken leg. She listened more carefully than any client who'd ever paid me. Then she came again the week after. No big gestures, not often enough to feel smothering, but regular enough that my house started recognizing the sound of her heels on the porch. And that was the problem. I was starting to get used to it. The months that followed, Victoria entered my life in ways I never planned. It started with Saturday morning coffee, then a few dinners. Eventually, she began stopping by while I did side jobs, restoring furniture, sitting at my kitchen table with her laptop open, reading company documents while I sanded chair legs or fixed broken joints. I started noticing things about her. Victoria Sterling knew how to run a 40-story building, but she didn't know what to do when soup boiled over on the stove. She could negotiate a $100 million deal, but she got flustered by my old coffee maker. She could silence an entire boardroom with one look, yet she would sit for a long time in front of Diane's photo on the shelf, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to look. One night, after I made my mother's old beef stew, Victoria stayed to help with the dishes. She wasn't good at it. The first plate still had soap on it. I didn't say anything, just rinsed it again. She noticed. "You can tell me I'm doing it wrong," she said. "I'm trying not to turn dishwashing into a performance review." She went quiet for a second, then laughed. A small, surprised laugh, like even she didn't know it was still inside her. That laugh did something to me. I started liking the sound of it. That was becoming a problem. Another night, she asked about Diane. "You don't have to answer," she said, "but I want to know what kind of person she was." So I told her. I told her Diane was a second-grade teacher, loud, loved terrible movies, cried at the second part of films she'd already called bad. I told her Diane sang lyrics wrong on purpose, left socks everywhere, and used to make me dance in the kitchen even though I had no idea what I was doing. Victoria listened without interrupting. When I finished, she spoke softly. "She sounds like someone worth remembering." "She was," I said. "I remember her every single day." She didn't try to compete with a dead woman. She didn't tell me to move on. She didn't say any of the empty things people say after funerals. That alone made her different from almost everyone who had tried to help me after the accident. Slowly, I started seeing cracks in her too. 4 years earlier, Victoria had been in a car accident. She survived, recovered, and returned to work after 6 months. On the surface, it was a success story. Powerful woman overcomes trauma and comes back stronger. But one night while we were cleaning up after dinner, she finally told me the real part. After the accident, there were 3 weeks when I wasn't sure I wanted to keep living. I stopped wiping the table. She didn't look at me. She looked at her own hands. I don't mean I couldn't recover. The doctor said I'd walk normally if I did the physical therapy. But I had built my entire identity around being in control. My schedule, my body, my company, my image, my results. Then, one snowy night, a car slid into my lane, and suddenly everything was hospitals and pain and other people deciding when I could stand, when I could shower, when I could work. Her voice stayed steady, but I could hear the effort underneath. I never told anyone. Not the doctors, not the therapists, not the board. I just lay there thinking that if I was going to keep living, I needed a reason bigger than everything I'd already built. I spoke quietly. "And you decided on a child." She nodded. "I wanted to build something that didn't belong to shareholders, didn't belong to quarterly reports, didn't belong to my reputation. Something that belonged only to my heart. But I didn't know how to ask for it like a normal person. So I did what I'm best at. I made a plan. I created files. I found candidates. And you showed up at my house with a folder. Yes. This time she actually looked ashamed. I didn't rush to comfort her. I just sat down across from her. Victoria, you're not wrong for wanting a child. You're wrong for thinking you could optimize your way into a family. She looked at me. I know, she said. I'm learning. That sentence made me soften more than I wanted to. Because Victoria Sterling, the woman this entire city believed never bowed to anyone, was sitting in my kitchen admitting she didn't know how to love something without trying to control it. And I, the man who thought he had buried his heart with Diane, was starting to realize my heart was still beating. It was just very afraid. The first real explosion between us happened on a cold December night. I came home from the site and found an envelope from Whitmore Academy, the most expensive private school in the city, sitting on my kitchen table. Inside was a letter informing me that my application for their professional development program in construction management had been accepted, and that Victoria Sterling had fully sponsored the tuition and secured me a spot. I called her immediately. You signed me up for this without asking me? She was quiet for a second. I was going to tell you tonight. After everything was already arranged, I thought it was a good opportunity. You have talent. You shouldn't stay a laborer forever if you can— Stop! I cut her off. I'm not your project. The line went completely silent. I kept going, my voice lower but heavier. You did this because you're scared. You see something you care about and you immediately use money and power and planning to lock it down. But I'm not a company you can acquire. I'm not a problem that needs fixing. And if you want to be in my life, you have to ask. You don't get to decide for me and then call it helping. She didn't argue. That made my anger fade, but the hurt stayed. After a long pause, she spoke, and her voice was different. You're right. I closed my eyes. I know. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to diminish you. I just saw a path and I acted before I considered whether you wanted to walk it. You can't love someone by controlling their life. The line stayed quiet for a long time. Then Victoria spoke so softly I almost missed it. I don't know how to not hold on tight when I'm afraid of losing something. That sentence made it impossible for me to stay angry. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass of the window. Then learn, I said. But learn by asking. After that call, something changed in her. Not perfectly, but honestly. She started asking before she helped. She texted, "Do you want me to come over tonight?" instead of just showing up. She asked, "Do you want my opinion?" before giving advice. She was still Victoria, sharp, decisive, sometimes making me want to bang my head against the wall. But now there was a door in every sentence, a space for me to choose. And that was what finally made me start to trust her. I realized I loved Victoria on a very ordinary morning. I had caught a fever after 3 days working in the rain. She showed up at 7 in the morning, but this time, she didn't force her way into my life like a command. She texted first. I'm standing outside your door. I have soup and medicine. If you want me to come in, open the door. I read the message, half exhausted and half amused. I opened the door. Victoria walked in carrying a bag of medicine, hot soup from the place down the street, and a serious expression like she was about to handle a financial crisis. She took my temperature, made me drink water, put me on the couch, and then sat at the kitchen table working on her laptop. When I woke up almost 4 hours later, she was still there. One hand typing emails, the other quietly moving a glass of water closer to me. I lay still and pretended I was still asleep for a few minutes, and I knew. It wasn't the kind of knowing that explodes, it was quiet. Certain. I love this woman. I kept it to myself for a few more weeks, because I wasn't just deciding for myself. I was deciding whether I was ready to open the house that once belonged to Diane for a new love. I was deciding whether Victoria truly loved me, or whether she only loved the feeling of stepping into a warmer home than her glass tower. I also needed to know if she could actually live in the ordinary. Burnt dinners, electric bills, the sound of an old heater, days where nothing needed optimizing except sitting next to each other. The answer came during another argument. That night, Victoria sat at the kitchen table telling me I should take on bigger projects, apply for a management position, stop fixing cheap chairs in the evenings because your time is worth more than that. I said, "Not everything needs to be optimized, Victoria." She answered immediately, "I completely disagree." I put the bread knife down. "I know, and that's what worries me." She looked at me. The air in the room cooled. "What do you mean?" I tried to say it carefully without hurting her just because I was annoyed. I mean, sometimes you look at something good and immediately want to make it better, bigger, more efficient, safer, but some things just need to be left alone. A normal dinner, a normal job, a normal man trying to live well. Victoria went silent. I continued, "You don't need to turn me into a better version of myself to be allowed to love me." That sentence hit something deep inside her. She looked down at the table. Both of her hands lay flat on the wood, not gripping anything, not controlling anything. When she spoke, her voice no longer sounded like a CEO. "I don't know how to look at something I care about without trying to make it safer." I sat down across from her. Victoria kept going, and for the first time she let the fear show clearly. "The things I care about have a habit of disappearing. Before the accident, I thought I controlled my life. Then one car slid on the snow and everything changed. After that, I held on even tighter. The company, money, schedule, my body, the people around me. I thought if I held tight enough, I wouldn't lose anything again." I said, "But you're still scared." She looked at me. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. "I'm scared of this. I'm not scared of being alone. I'm good at being alone. I'm scared of having you, scared of loving you, scared of wanting to sit at this kitchen table tomorrow night, next week, next year, scared of waking up one day and losing it." I felt my chest ache in a very familiar way. "I can't promise you won't lose anything," I said. "Then how did you dare to love again after Diane?" I was quiet for a long time. Then I told her the truth. Because Diane would scold me if I used her death as an excuse to turn the rest of my life into a locked room. And because some things are worth risking losing again. Victoria looked at me like I had just pushed her to the edge of a cliff, and was also the only person standing there with a hand outstretched. "You're making me say it," she said. "I'm not making you do anything." She looked almost angry at her own helplessness. "You just sit there being you, and it feels almost like being forced." I couldn't help a small laugh. Victoria stared at me, then finally said the words, "I love you. It's extremely inconvenient, and I want that inconvenience on record." I looked at her for a long time. Then I said, "I love you too. I have for a while." Her face changed, not a victorious smile. It was the look of someone who had finally been allowed to put down a weight she didn't realize she'd been carrying. "How long?" she asked. "Since the morning you brought soup and medicine. I woke up and saw you sitting at my kitchen table like you belonged there." She whispered, "You waited that long?" "I was being careful, with you, with me, with Diane's memory. I needed to be sure this wasn't you trying to build a family through a plan, and it wasn't me trying to fill an empty house with the first woman who stayed." Victoria nodded slowly. "And now you're sure?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm sure." She placed her hand in mine. There was no music, no grand promises, just an old kitchen, cooling dinner, light rain outside the window, and two people who had once believed they knew how to live alone finally admitting they no longer wanted to. 1 year after the night Victoria knocked on my door, we got married. Not in a fancy hotel, not in some ballroom for the wealthy. Victoria had once shown me a list of venues that made me want to sit down just from looking at the prices. I gave her the look she had learned meant not a chance in hell, and she closed her laptop. "Where do you want to do it?" she asked. "Backyard." She looked at me for a moment, then smiled. "Of course, the backyard." Fewer than 30 people came. My mother, a few close coworkers, the priest from St. Michael's, Victoria's most trusted assistant, and a handful of real friends instead of business contacts. Victoria wore a simple white dress, no flashy jewelry, no armor of a CEO. She walked toward me on her own 2 feet, slow and steady, like she was choosing every step. When she reached me, she whispered, "I'm not going to cry." "I believe you." She narrowed her eyes. "You're looking at me like you know I will." "I don't know anything more than you do. I just know it at the same time you do." She bit her lip. Her eyes shone. Then she laughed instead of crying. My vows were simple. I told her I couldn't promise a perfect life because I didn't know how to make one, and she wouldn't believe me if I said I did. I promised I would show up on ordinary days, inconvenient days, tired days, and days that weren't planned. I said Diane had taught me that love is being alive, while Victoria had taught me that love can also mean learning to trust again after you thought you were too old to trust. Victoria had written her vows on beautiful paper, of course. But when she opened the paper, she folded it again. I needed to write it down to know what I knew, she said, but now I want to say it for real. She looked at me. I spent my whole life building things that looked like I was in control, the company, the strategy, the plans, the contracts. But you have a mug that says, world's okayest everything, a kitchen with a drawer that never closes properly, and a life where people can fail a little every day without being sent away. I want to be there. I want to be in the place where imperfect things are allowed to exist. I want to be where you are. I took her hand, and we became husband and wife. The months that followed were the quietest I had known since Diane died. Not empty quiet. The kind of quiet where a house finally finds its new rhythm. Victoria still ran Sterling Global, but she protected the hours between 5 and 8 in the evening like they were a meeting no one was allowed to interrupt. She was there for dinner. She was there when the water heater broke. She was there when I finally applied for a project manager position at Hargrove after years of being too afraid to try. When I told her I got the job, she just said, "Of course you did. You can't even pretend to be surprised?" I'm not good at pretending to be stupid. I called her impossible. She said I knew that from the beginning, and I loved that impossible part of her too. But then came the phone call in January. I was in the kitchen when I saw Victoria sitting in the living room, very still, her phone resting on her lap. I knew immediately that this kind of still wasn't good. I walked over. "What happened?" she answered in an even voice. "The doctor said the final round of treatment didn't work. She's not recommending we try again." She used the words final conclusion. I sat down across from her. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. I also didn't say we still have each other, because in that moment the words felt too thin to cover her pain. I just sat there. After a long while, Victoria spoke. I knew this possibility was high. I had the data. But when it becomes the final conclusion, it feels different. "Yeah," I said. "It does." She looked at me, her voice lower. "I feel like I failed. I know that's irrational. This is biology, not a performance report, but I still feel it." I took her hand. "You didn't fail. Your body survived a car accident, surgeries, recovery, and years of you forcing it to be stronger than any human body should have to be. It didn't betray you. It just went in a different direction than our plan." Victoria looked at me. "Our plan?" "Yeah, ours." She cried in front of me for the first time without trying to hide it. A few weeks later, she left a folder on the kitchen table. Not like the first night. Not something meant to pressure anyone into signing. Just information about adoption programs for children who are hard to place, especially those with medical conditions, disabilities, or who had been returned multiple times. I finished reading and looked at her. "You want to adopt?" She sat across from me, both hands resting on the table, not clenched. "I want us to think about it, not decide tonight. Not because I need to replace what we lost, but because there are children waiting for a family that doesn't see them as a problem that needs fixing." I looked at the woman who had once knocked on my door with a folder trying to buy a shortcut to a family. Now she sat here, not pushing, not planning for me, just leaving a door open and waiting for me to walk through if I wanted. I said, "Then let's look into it." 3 months later, we met Emma. She was 3 years old, profoundly deaf, and had been in the system since she was 14 months. The social worker told us Emma was very cautious with strangers. She didn't run up. She didn't hug. She didn't trust quickly. She sat in the corner, holding an old stuffed rabbit, her dark eyes watching everyone like she was measuring who would leave first. I sat on the floor and kept my distance. Victoria sat on a chair near the door. She didn't try to call Emma over. She didn't rush to be overly sweet. She just stayed there, quiet and clear. Emma looked at me, then at Victoria. She stood up and walked slowly toward her. She looked at Victoria's low heels, at her hands, at her face. Then she reached out and touched the edge of Victoria's coat. Victoria asked very softly, "Hello, sweetheart." Emma couldn't hear clearly, but she must have felt it. She looked up, then raised both arms, a gesture that needed no translation. "Hold me." Victoria looked at me over Emma's head. In her eyes was a question too big for words. I nodded. Victoria picked Emma up. The little girl rested her head on Victoria's shoulder like she had walked a very long way and finally found a place to rest. I had to turn my face away for a second. 6 months later, Emma came home. She arrived with a small bag, new yellow shoes, a tiny hearing aid behind each ear, and eyes that were still cautious. Victoria had spent 3 months learning sign language. I learned slower, clumsier, but Emma never complained. She just watched my hands and gently corrected each sign with the serious face of a tiny teacher. That first evening, we ate at the old kitchen table, the same table where I had once rejected Victoria, where she had admitted her fears, where we had argued, fallen in love, hurt together, and placed an adoption folder down like a question. Emma ate 4 bites, then got distracted watching everything. Victoria looked at her, no longer the woman trying to build a family through contracts. She was simply a new mother, scared and happy at the same time, trying not to overwhelm the child with too much love too fast. After dinner, Emma stood in the hallway. She looked at the small bedroom we had prepared for her, pale yellow walls, a moon-shaped nightlight, a low bookshelf, and a new stuffed rabbit sitting on the pillow. Victoria signed slowly and clearly. "This is your room. You live here. You stay." Emma watched her hands, looked at the room, then looked at me. I signed, clumsy but sure. "Home." Emma blinked. Then she walked inside. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Victoria and I sat at the kitchen table. My old World's Okayest Everything mug was still there, chipped on the handle. She had once wanted to replace it. Now she just turned it slowly in her hands and smiled. "Do you know what I'm thinking?" she asked. "Tell me." The first night I came here, I had an entire structure in my head. Files, contracts, terms, plans. I thought I was coming to find a way to have a child. She looked toward the hallway, where Emma's room glowed softly. It turns out I came to learn how to become a mother. I placed my hand over hers, and I thought I was opening the door to a problem. Victoria looked at me. "So, what am I in the end?" I looked at the kitchen, at the hallway, at the woman who had made my life wider than the old pain. "You're home." From the other room, Emma laughed in her sleep. A small, surprised laugh, so bright that both of us turned at the same time. Victoria squeezed my hand. No folder could have predicted that moment. No lawyer could have written the terms for it. No bank account could have bought the feeling of a child finally sleeping in her own room, in a house where no one saw her as a problem. I once thought my life ended the day Diane died. Victoria once thought family was something she had to acquire through planning. Emma once thought home was a place people could leave whenever they wanted. We were all wrong. Home is not something designed perfectly from the beginning. Home is something 3 broken people learn to build together, day by day, one dinner, one clumsy sign, one night of staying.